Hey, I'm curious, how many of my kiddos that are in here are playing baseball right now? You in a baseball season, some of you? Okay, I see some of you. How many of you grew up playing baseball? My big kids in here. Did anybody grow up playing baseball? Okay, how many people enjoy the game of baseball just as a fan? Okay, I'm trying to get us all in the boat here. Come on in. One of the most fundamental principles of baseball is what? Keep your eye on the ball, right? I grew up playing baseball. I grew up learning this lesson very early on in my life as a 5-year-old boy, learning how to try to pay attention to what was going on in the game. But the reality is, for all of you T-ball parents, or maybe you've lived through that process, you know that the kiddos, there's a game going on back there in the upper right corner of that picture. You would not know it from looking at those kids who are out in the outfield just wondering if a ball will ever make its way out there. There's bugs, there's dandelions, there's crickets hopping around, there's a concession stand with the smells of nachos and hot dogs wafting through the air. Plenty of reasons for kids to not keep their eye on the ball, right? You've been there. But nonetheless, if we are going to get a hit, if we're going to catch, if we're playing another sport and we're going to kick the ball, or we're going to find the guy who's carrying the ball and run and tackle them, we have got to keep our eye on the ball. Even if you didn't play baseball, this principle still holds true for you. When I was 8 years old, I will never forget this. One of the boys was up to bat, and one of the moms in the stands was sitting there not paying attention to the game at all, not keeping her eye on the ball, chatting with some of the other parents in the stands when one of the boys that was at the plate popped a foul ball up into the air. It went over the dugout and landed right on the top of this lady's head, just plunked her right on the head. And the reason I'll never forget that is because she wore a helmet the rest of the season. And I just thought that was the funniest thing. Did you know that you and I have an enemy who wants to take our eyes off the ball? If you stick around Two Rivers Church long enough, you're bound to hear a phrase similar to this: our yes is on the table. In fact, I texted someone just this week to get an update on their adoption process, and the response from my friend was this: we put our yes on the table. Oh, that got me fired up. I love hearing stories like that. I got a call this week from a mom and a dad whose little daughter, their firstborn daughter, prayed and asked Jesus to come into her heart and live forever. She put her yes on the table, even at an early age. But here's the reality, and we've talked about this here. When we say yes to God, when we get in the game, guaranteed you will face opposition. You have an opponent, and that opposition comes from 3 places, the scriptures tell us: the world, our flesh, and the devil. The world, our flesh, and the devil. Our world is trying to make truth relative right now. Our world is in opposition to God's design and his will for our lives. And our flesh is weak, and we are easily swayed. And the devil, well, he's always whispering lies to us. He's always trying to lure us away, while at the same time, he's trying to condemn us. And he doesn't just want to defeat you. He wants to destroy you. He wants to destroy your self-image. He wants to destroy your marriage, your integrity, your confidence in God, your trust in other people. He wants to destroy you. And if he can get our eye off the ball, that's how he'll oppose the work that God is trying to do in you, but also through you. And today, I want to show you a time when God's people were facing an opposition like this. And then we're going to talk about why we need to keep our eye on the ball. So if you got a Bible, go ahead and open it to the Old Testament book of Nehemiah. If you have, maybe it's a smartphone and you probably do not have service in this giant concrete room, but we do have a guest network, Two Rivers Church Guest, if you want to try to connect to that so you can get online on your Bible app. We're going to be in Nehemiah this morning. We've been working our way through the entire Bible. We're in the historical section right now. Last week, Richard Gamble walked us through the book of Ezra, and we saw God help his people return from exile and start to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem so that they could have a place to worship again. Now here in the book of Nehemiah, we need to learn a little bit about this man. Nehemiah was a man of Jewish heritage. He held one of the most prominent positions in all of the Persian kingdom, which was the superpower at that time. Nehemiah was the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. So if anybody was going to try to, poison the king, they had to get through Nehemiah. This was a position of great prominence, of great importance, and a high level of trust with the king of this superpower. Well, one day in 445 BC, and if I have any kids in the room, elementary school kids, how many years ago was that? 445 BC. If you can work that out and come and tell me after the service, I got something for you, okay? 445 BC. That was about 13 years after Ezra arrived in Jerusalem. That was the story we talked about last week. There were some messengers that came to Nehemiah in the citadel, and they were telling him about what was going on back home. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 3. They said to me, these messengers said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. A city without walls in this time period might as well have been a mockery to the people around them. When the walls are broken down, the city is indefensible, which means they're vulnerable to attacks from their enemies. They're vulnerable to raiders and robbers. They were not safe. They were not living in security right now. Verse 4. As soon as I heard these words, Nehemiah says, I sat down and I wept and I mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. Now we need to keep in mind that Nehemiah is hundreds of miles away from what's going on back in Jerusalem. He is so far geographically removed right now. He's in the palace of the supreme ruler of the world superpower of the day, enjoying the position of prominence and trust and security. And yet, in all of that, something starts to stir deeply inside of him. Have you ever been stirred so deeply by something? You saw something and you just thought, that's not right. Someone ought to do something. Nehemiah right here in this moment was sensing that stirring. He was discovering his why, his purpose that God had for him. The whole reason for him to hear about this report, God was doing something in his heart. Do you know what your why is? I've heard it said that when we lose our why, we lose our way. When we lose our why, we lose our way. When I first started following Jesus, I moved down to Florida with a bunch of other college students who were also trying to learn how to follow Jesus. And one of the first things we did when we moved there was go to a dog racing track and bet on dog races. I was just learning to follow Jesus, okay? Like there was some things that I was still working out. And this was a curiosity thing, really, to go and watch how this whole thing went down. I think, we got some horse racing coming up very soon in this season. Well, if you've ever been to a dog track, some of these images will come to mind and they'll be familiar to you. But when those gates open up and those dogs take off running, there is a lot that goes into making those dogs run around that track and race and try to be first. It's training, it's bred into their DNA, but there's something else too. There is a mechanical arm with a bunny on the end of it that they're chasing. As soon as those gates open and that bell goes off and that race begins, that mechanical arm with that huge bunny on it takes off out in front of those dogs, and they just go chasing after that bunny. They got their eyes focused on that bunny. Well, several years ago, there was a news story about at one of the most prominent tracks down in Florida where there was a big malfunction here. I don't know what happened, but something like this thing all of a sudden stopped. The bunny kind of exploded, and there were stuffed bunny guts everywhere. And you know what the dogs did? They stopped running. When that bunny stopped out in front of them, the dogs all stopped running. And it was so fascinating to watch what happened to the dogs. Some of them just, right there in the middle of the racetrack, just sat down and just started panting, just quit. Some of the dogs were just all of a sudden started barking at the other dogs and barking at the people in the stands, just barking at anything that was moving. Some of the dogs actually tried to run through this barrier into the infield, and they got hurt. There were dogs that got broken ribs, and all kinds of things happened to these dogs who all of a sudden didn't know what to do because the thing they were chasing was no more. And I think that's an interesting way to think about how we operate as people sometimes. Proverbs 29, verse 18 says that when there's no vision, people cast off restraint. But blessed is he who keeps the law. When there's no vision, when there's no bunny out there to chase, or when there's no ball to keep our eye on, I realize I've got all the metaphors today, so you pick which one you identify most with. When there's nothing out there that we can set our gaze on, that we're going after, when we don't have our why, we get discouraged. We can become apathetic. We can be easily distracted. We can get frustrated and angry. It'd be like those dogs just start barking at other people around us. We can find ourselves chasing the wrong things, like those dogs running through the infield, getting ourselves hurt, or worse, missing the very thing that God has called us to. Over the next several months, Nehemiah started praying and fasting about what to do with this why that was stirring inside his heart. He got permission from the king to go back to Jerusalem. He formulated a plan. He recruited some people to work, and then he got to work on restoring the walls and the well-being of the people who lived in Jerusalem. But with his yes on the table, here comes trouble. Here comes opposition in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 1. Now, when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set up the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come and let us meet together at Hakkephirim in the plain of Ono." But they intended to do me harm. And I sent messengers to them saying, "I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them every time in the same manner. So we're kind of summarizing the story here, but these guys, Sanballat and Tobiah, they actually show up a little bit earlier in Nehemiah chapter 4. They don't like Jerusalem being restored. That's bad for business. Somehow they were making money on the plight of those who lived in Jerusalem. So they resort to scare tactics in chapter 4. They start taunting Nehemiah and all the people. They start ridiculing them, literally saying, "You'll never do that. You'll never rebuild your city. Just give up. Leave town." They start planning attacks on the people. But Nehemiah starts having everybody working with a shovel in one hand and a sword in the other so that they could be ready for anything that may come against them. So now, these guys in chapter 6, they're resorting to distraction. They're trying to pull Nehemiah, their leader, away to a meeting in Ono, which as I was reading that, just thought, note to self, if anybody ever calls you away to a meeting in a place called Ono, just say, oh no. Yeah, that was terrible. That was a terrible joke. Back when we had 2 services, a joke like that hit the ground flat, I just wouldn't have said it in the second service. And we would all have been better for it. But in one service, we got it. We got it. We got it. Oh no. Oh no. Distraction. Distraction can be such a subtle tactic from the enemy to get our eye off the ball. I'm sure that for Nehemiah, there was a temptation to meet with these guys. They're important people in the community. They do pose a threat to Nehemiah and the people and the work they're trying to do. It might make good sense to make peace with these guys. I'm sure it looked urgent, right? A lot of distractions look urgent to us in our lives. I wonder if you've ever gotten on your phone to do something, then you see a notification pop up or maybe a little, red circle with a number in it. Something catches your eye, and 5 minutes later, you find yourself standing in the middle of the bathroom. You don't remember how you got there or what you're even doing there. Or maybe your spouse walks by and she's like, what are you doing? And you're like, I don't know. Literally this week, I was in my office. I was working on the manuscript. I went to the internet to take a verse, copy and paste it into my notes, so I had to go to the internet, and it was an hour before I came back to my sermon document. And in the meantime, I had tried to make a custom hat. I had commented on somebody's Facebook post, and I had watched a video of a grown man riding a plasma car, which if you know what that is, that's those little cars that you sit on and you do this, and then the car moves and does like this. That's what I did for like an hour. I was trying to do something really important. Maybe you're like me. I have a hard time being present when I get home from work because that little distraction box I carry around in my pocket is always beckoning and calling and drawing me away. Nehemiah sees this meeting as a distraction. He's got his eye on the ball. Look how he responds in verse 3. I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? See, Nehemiah knew what God had sent him to do. God had put a vision in his heart. God had given him this perfect position to speak to the king and get everything he needed to accomplish this vision. No distraction was going to stop him. I love what Nehemiah said right there. I'm not coming down. I am doing a great work. Do you know what your great work is? What's the great work that God is doing in you right now? What's the great work that God wants to do through you right now? Think about the way he's uniquely positioned you. Think about the people that he's placed in your life. Parents, what's the great work for you and your family? When you come home from work, or maybe the kids come home from school, perhaps your great work is to engage with them, to engage their hearts and their minds. And when your little distraction box in your pocket starts squawking, or vibrating, inviting you to, scroll through the pictures, see what someone posted about the picture of your sandwich that you posted about earlier in the day, you just say, no, I'm doing a great work right now, and I'm not going to stop it. Or maybe you get on your phone, or you get on an app or a website, and there's something that catches your eye. It's an image that perhaps is taking you somewhere you shouldn't go, like to the plain of oh no. And you say, oh no, I'm doing a great work right now. I'm protecting my mind from stuff like this. I'm not going there. I'm not coming down off my wall. I'm not going to stop that great work that's going on in my life right now. Maybe you get up early in the morning to spend time with God and to open up His Word. And then all of a sudden, as you do that, you check your phone and you see there are notifications. But you say, no, I'm doing a great work right now. When a friend starts to bring you into the loop on something that is starting to feel like gossip. Or when you're tempted to skip small group this week because you've had a long, hard week. When you're tempted to withhold your financial resources, your tithes, because money has felt tight lately. Or you're tempted to believe the lies that the enemy has been whispering to you. When you're tempted to seek revenge, to take matters into your own hands instead of trusting God for restoration, you say, no, I'm doing a good work. God is at work in my life right now. I'm not going to stop that. I'm not coming down off this wall. God has given me a great work to do. That's why it's important that you know what that great work is. The ball that you need to keep your eye on. Maybe it's a specific area in your life where you just really need to focus. Our culture today loves, multitasking, all kinds of distractions. But maybe there's an area where you really need to dial in and focus right now. God's calling you to focus on your marriage. God's calling you to love a neighbor. God's calling you to be very intentional with your kids right now in this stage of life that they're in. God's calling you to get out of debt or to entrust your finances to Him. God's calling you to find a place to join Him in what He's doing in ministry here at the church, in ministry to our community. What is that area where you need to focus? Nehemiah knew his mission. And so he said, I can't stop. I won't stop. So for Sanballat and his gang, they had to find another approach. Verse 5. In the same way, Sanballat for the 5th time sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand. So this guy's got a letter now. And in the letter was written, it's reported among the nations, and Geshem also says it. A lot of people have been talking about this, Nehemiah, that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you're building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. And you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. And now the king Artaxerxes, the one Nehemiah works for, the king of the superpower Persia, is going to hear all these reports. So come on, Nehemiah, let's take counsel together. Let's meet together so we can talk about all these things. I'm looking out for you, Nehemiah. No. Sanballat and Tobiah are not out for Nehemiah. They're out for themselves. This is a smear campaign. They're not worried about what the king might think. This was designed to start rumors. This was designed to spread false accusations and assign false motives to Nehemiah and the rest of the Jewish people who were trying to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. The whole plan was to get everyone's eye off the ball, to stop and figure out where this information's coming from, to stop and figure out why all this gossip is spreading. That would stop the work they were called to do. Have you ever had rumors spread about you? Have you ever felt the sting of someone perhaps misunderstanding your heart, assigning motives to you that weren't true? Maybe you found yourself the target of a verbal attack, even though you were trying to do the right thing. How did you respond? How much time and energy was spent trying to figure all that out. A distraction tactic from the enemy. How did Nehemiah respond? Verse 8. So I sent to him, saying, no such things as you say have been done, for you are inventing them out of your own mind. For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hands will drop from the work and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. I love Nehemiah's response. It's really simple. That's not true. Pray and keep working. That's not true. Now, God, help us as we keep working. Nehemiah didn't take the bait. He's entrusting this whole thing to God. He didn't take his eye off the ball. And so there's one final attack. And this one's next level. Verse 10. Now, when I went into the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, son of Mehetabel, who was confined to his home, he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple. Let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. They're coming to kill you by night. But I said, should such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in. And I understood and saw that God had not sent him. But he had pronounced the prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. For this purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act in this way and sin. And so they could give me a bad name in order to taunt me. Shemaiah was some kind of prophet in the community. And now these guys, Sanballat and Tobiah, are sending him to speak in the name of God. This is the dirtiest of tactics of our enemy. See, what we need to know is that the enemy of our souls, the enemy of God, is a poser. He disguises himself as someone or something good to lure us away and trap us and destroy us. You put your yes on the table, and someone along the way is going to speak to you as though they were speaking on behalf of God. Has that ever happened to you? Something's going to present itself as an opportunity that will potentially look like a blessing from the hand of God. How will you know the difference? If we don't know what the voice of God sounds like, if we're not in tune with the types of things that God calls us and invites us into, then we might fall for the counterfeit. See, how did Nehemiah know that this was another plot against him? He knew it was against God's word to go into the temple. You don't just walk into the temple like that. That's why it's important that we spend time in God's word. Get to know his voice. Get to know how God speaks. He will never speak or lead us in any way that contradicts his word. Let me say that again. God will never speak something to the innermost parts of your being. He will never lead you in a direction that is in any way contradictory to his word. That's how we'll know when this might be a tactic from the enemy. That's how we'll know when this might be a distraction. That's how we'll know when maybe our flesh is wanting to lean one way, when we need to lean back into the way God has revealed himself to us. So that we don't stop the work that we're doing. So that we don't leave. So that we don't give up. We always need to ask, does this line up with what I know to be true about God's word? And when we do that, and we resist the temptation to follow those distractions, when we resist the temptation to give in to all the chatter that's going on around us, look what happens when we keep our eye on the ball. Verse 15. The wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid, and they fell greatly in their own esteem. For they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Don't ever underestimate what can be accomplished when God has called you to something. When we keep our eye on the ball, as we pursue this God-given vision and passion and why inside of us, He will help us and give us everything we need to accomplish what He has called us to do. And the enemy will tremble. So what? What does this mean for us as we head out of this place and on to the rest of our days and our neighbors and our families and work? Let me ask you the question again. Do you know the great work that God is calling you to in this season of your life? Do you know what that great work is? Let me help define it a little bit for us, because I know that for as many people as we have in here today and that are watching online, there are that many different things that God is doing right now amongst us. But let me help kind of like give us a general category for this. The great work that God is doing has a lot to do with you becoming more like Jesus. He's wanting to change your life and shape you more into the character of His Son, Jesus. You're made in His image, and He's restoring that broken image from sin. He's making you a new person. So what He's doing, that great work in you as you keep your eye on the ball, is making you more like Jesus. And then He's making the name of Jesus known through your life. That's what God's doing, making you more like Jesus and making Jesus known through you. So I want to talk about what this means for us as a church family for just a second. God has called Two Rivers Church to a great work. This church family, we've been called to a great work. We have a mission statement. It says we connect people, which is really important. We connect people to a caring family that is being transformed by Jesus to make an impact in the world around us. We are passionate about this. This is the ball. This is the why. This is the mission, to connect people to a caring family, which means we got to learn how to become a caring family as we're being transformed by the power of Jesus. That's where the power comes from. It's from Jesus changing us so that the world can be changed through us. That's our mission. That's the ball we need to keep our eye on. In this past year, in the midst of this pandemic, it's been really hard on so many levels. It's been hard for us, for you, relationally. It's been hard for those who have lost loved ones or have battled illness, who have gone to the brink and have been scared to death. It's been hard for those who have lost work or seen a hit to their finances. It's been a challenge. There's been some good in it too. You know, a lot of us got puppies and you know, the checks, the stimulus checks, and working from home in our pajamas. There's some fun things and some good that has come out of this as well. But here's what I've been feeling. Because of this pandemic, we had to push pause on some of the great work. We had to push pause on mission trips. We had to push pause on student camps. We had to push pause on kids ministry. We had to push pause on small group gatherings for a little while. We had to push pause on a building campaign. Some of us haven't seen our friends in a long time. Some of us that are watching online still feel that pain. We've not been able to do life together like we're truly meant to do it. It's like our vision bunny exploded, right? And then kind of like those dogs, we just had to stop running and we weren't real sure what to do. And so, you know, we start just doing other things. And I want you to hear me calling us back to the great work that God has called us to as a church family. To get back in the game, to get our eyes on the ball. We have a great work to do here. And every single one of you is invited to be a part of it. In the coming weeks, you're going to hear about a couple of new staff hires. This summer, we're rolling out to all of our leaders something we're calling the discipleship pathway. It's a pathway that has clear, intentional steps for every single person who would come through the doors at Two Rivers Church or get connected to a group at Two Rivers Church. You would know what your next step is to deepen and strengthen your faith. This is going to help us multiply our small groups. This is going to help us expand our impact locally, but also globally, to see God do a great work in us, but also through us. I want you to think about Jesus for a second. Mark chapter 15, Jesus was hanging on a cross. It was about the third hour, 9 a.m., when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against Jesus that was hanging over his head read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by him derided him. They were wagging their heads and saying, "Aha! You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days," which was not exactly what he said. "Save yourself. Come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes, they mocked Jesus to one another, and they said, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross so that we may see and believe." Do you hear people saying, "Hey, Jesus, come down off that cross"? But he didn't come down off that cross because he was doing a great work. He wasn't trying to save himself. He was trying to save us. I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down from here. I will not come down from here and let the work stop. And because of the finished, completed work of Jesus on the cross and then his resurrection from the grave, we have the opportunity to have life in his name, to be transformed by him, to experience his power in us and through us. Aren't you glad Jesus did not come down from his great work? He's called us to a great work. To keep our eye on the ball